Welcome to the channel, everybody. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to do a review on the Requisite Audio L2M Mark III Mid-Side Edition. That's a mouthful. What is it? If you haven't heard of this thing before, it is a stereo LA2A based compressor intended for mastering and stereo mix work, or you can use it as a dual mono, two LA2As in one package. That's pretty cool, but some of you may have actually tried using LA2As in stereo before, something I imagine students at like recording college doing with the fancy equipment, but not really realizing what it takes to be a good stereo processor. So what does it take? You really have to have good matching from side to side, right? The left side and the right side are both working on, independent circuitry, basically. So we got to make sure that they behave the same way, or else our stereo image is going to go all crazy and nothing's going to sound right, especially if the timing is off and the loudness is off, right? It's going to be a mess. So this is why we largely have stereo VCA based compressors, because solid state circuitry is a lot easier to match up and make sure it's very precise. Optical elements and tubes and all that kind of stuff is not that easy to get matched. So it's kind of a feat that Danny mkIII was able to create this compressor that works really, really well in stereo. There's a few optical stereo units out there, and all of them require very, very good designs. We'll talk a bit about those at the very end of the video. So yeah, it's an LA2A based mastering compressor. When you're working on a stereo mix or, full program material, when you're working on the dynamics of the entire thing, if it's not just right, it's going to sound kind of weird. It's going to sound kind of bad. You probably all know what overcompressed mixes sound like. It's not a good time. So not having like a great degree of control and just kind of like letting the Opto elements do what they do feels kind of crazy. It sounds a little bit crazy to me, but it totally works. And it works because the LA2A is a great compressor, and everybody knows that you just kind of get it doing its thing, and it does its thing, and it holds stuff down, and it makes stuff sound great. And that's what we have going on here with this unit, okay? So it's not just an LA2A, though. There's some extra controls. You do have more control than an LA2A, maybe not as much control as my SPL Cool Tube, which I've done a video on before, but still a nice additional facilities on this to help you dial this rate in to work on a master, or you could just use it like an LA2A that has way more control, okay? And I have to note something that's kind of interesting about this. Like $8,500 US to buy this thing with the basic power supply, I think. Now, that's really expensive. Like it is really expensive. And I admit that most people can't buy this, but there are people out there who go and buy LA2As. And buying two LA2As is going to be more money than buying this thing. And this thing is like an upgraded version in every way. Like this is like better in every way than an LA2A. That's what it's designed to be. And it's cheaper, and you can get it and use it as a stereo processor. But for some reason, this isn't like in every major studio in the entire world. I don't really understand. It's in a lot. Like if you go on the REW forums, you'll find some pretty heavy hitters talking about this thing and loving it because it's great. But it's just like, I don't know why like this isn't as ubiquitous as like the Manley Varimu, for example. Why wouldn't it be? I don't know. Anyways, let's talk about the features of this unit. We're going to look at the panel and go from left to right and take a look at everything and understand what Danny has made for us in this delightful red beast. Okay, let's talk about the features of the unit. We're going to start on the far left here with the in and bypass. Now, this is nice and ergonomic. You can turn it on and off very easily with your thumb and finger like I am here, and that makes it easy to compare both channels at the same time. There is a bit of a click, though, because it's just the switches. It's not controlling relays or anything like that. That's not really a problem because I don't find myself bringing this thing in and out of the audio path while I'm actually printing a track through the analog chain, so who cares, right? But one thing we really like about this is that it's not a true hardwire bypass. And by that, I mean it's compressing while it's in bypass. So the signal is being sent from the input to the output, but it's also being split off and going to the detector of the compressor. And that's good because when we bring it in from bypass, we want to hear it in compression already. Otherwise, it'll be at a different loudness than it would be, and you're not really getting a fair comparison. Up next, we have the output level. Now, we like to think of our signal flow going from left to right. So we're used to having an input level right on the left, but this is actually the output level. So, you got to act accordingly with that. And we have a range from -6 dB all the way up to plus 16 dB. So a lot of room there, and the amplifier itself has like a pretty good color if you crank it up from having deep gain reduction. But because there isn't an in and out control, you can't really like leverage that box tone out of this so easily as cranking the input and lowering the output, or lowering the input and cranking the output. But that's okay. It's fun to mess around with these things and find the golden color wherever it lies in this thing. And by the way, the reputation that this unit has is for dumping liquid gold or liquid butter all over the mix, which is very much how it sounds. And you're going to hear that in a bit. Okay, anyways, after output level, we have the limiter feedback control. Now, get nerdy with me here, okay? Let's talk about this because it's cool. All amplifiers need to have a negative feedback loop to avoid a crazy amount of distortion. It's just how their circuit works. And the negative feedback loop is the signal coming out and being inverted and sent back in. And that reduces the amplification by a lot, and it also reduces the distortion a lot. Now, if we turn that negative feedback loop down, the signal gets louder and we get more distortion. Now, this limiter feedback control is doing that, which is great because it means we have control over how much distortion the circuit has. But it's kind of done backwards because when you're actually turning this control clockwise like this, you are actually turning the negative feedback loop down. So it's going in a positive direction and the numbers are getting positive. You're actually turning something down in the circuit. But it makes perfect intuitive sense because the loudness comes up and the saturation comes up. So he made that control so that it made sense to you intuitively, even though from a technical standpoint, it's actually wired the opposite way. And that is actually similar to the limiter response control. We'll talk about ratio in a second. But the limiter response control is also something that's a little bit different. It is basically like your high-pass filter in the sidechain, except it's not a high-pass filter, it's a shelf. And when you turn the limiter response up, you're kind of just cutting that shelf, which kind of cuts very gently from 1K down. And it works pretty well. Like I actually like this a lot because when you're riding up a high pass filter, you can kind of just get rid of the kick entirely, which you might actually want. But with this, you're kind of more reducing the low end's influence instead of like actually cutting out a portion of the sub bass or mid bass or whatever it is. You see what I mean? So you're still kind of getting a nice even-handed approach to the compression. So that works pretty well. And then we have, let's talk about ratio now. So 3-to-1 and 10-to-1. Now, this is an opto compressor. You got to take this with a grain of salt. Opto compressors don't have a knee that goes like this. They don't have a transfer curve that's like 1-to-1 and then like 3-to-1 like a VCA compressor has. Opto compressor has an interesting curve, and it's because of the chemistry that's happening in the opto element. That's what controls the actual compression is chemistry, photosensitive chemistry. And because it's kind of more, I wouldn't say organic, but it's more of a complicated thing. It has a complicated transfer curve, and it goes 1-to-1, then it goes soft knee into compression, and then soft knee out of compression again. And there isn't any real linear spot on that transfer curve. But when we talk about the ratio of an optical compressor, 3-to-1, 10-to-1, what we are talking about is that in that spot where we have the compression, see like soft knees in and then out, in the most linear spot there, we're talking like 3-to-1-ish or 10-to-1-ish. So basically it just means like more or less aggressive in how you're compressing it. But we got to talk more about that transfer curve because that's the deal. Like that's why we like opto compressors so much. Because if you make the compression happen in this little soft knee in, right, it's very gentle. It can be almost very mu-ish depending on how big the knee is and how much compression you want to put on it, right? Or you can have it more in that linear zone, which is a little bit more predictable, a little bit more VCA-ish, or you can have it going over both of them, right? Or you can actually have it so that it's on the soft knee out of our compression zone, which means that the transients aren't really getting compressed, but the sustained material is. And so this is why optical compressors are so cool, is you can do all these different things with them. So the way that kind of plays out with this is sometimes I'm working on a song and I turn this thing on and I'm like, oh, it just completely killed the kick drum, right? But it only killed the kick drum because I was on the wrong spot of the transfer curve. And if I go more deeply into compression, well, now that kick drum is sneaking out of our compression zone and it actually sounds nice and punchy, right? And I'm going to try to show you that on a couple of these clips later. Everything that this compressor does is subtle, so you're going to have to listen very carefully. Okay, on to peak reduction. If you've used an LA2A before, you know what peak reduction is all about. Turn it up, more compression. Turn it down, less compression. Okay, now let's talk about these center controls. So we have our mid-side matrix here, and this is kind of interesting. It's not the way you would think it should be done, or the way that you would guess it's done. The mid control is in its neutral spot here. You pull it out to engage the mid-side matrix. That's at its neutral point. When you turn it down from there, it's attenuating the mid signal. And if you turn it up from there, it's boosting the mid signal. Now the side here is in its neutral position. So that is, if I have it like this, that should be the same stereo image as not having the mid-side matrix going, okay? Now the side control here, when you actually turn it, it doesn't turn the side control down. It doesn't attenuate it like you think it might. It actually rotates it. So it starts like left and right like this, and then it goes, and then at 12 o'clock it's here. And then by the time you get all the way to the other side, it's left and right have inverted their sides. Like they've swapped channels. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. You can manipulate the stereo image in some interesting ways like that. There isn't any kind of like volume matching on here. So when you turn it on, you have to compensate with the output gain, 3 dB, I believe, to make it the same loudness as it was before. So that means we can't take it in and out of mid-side and compare and to see whether it's benefiting the signal very well. So that's kind of inconvenient. The other thing that's kind of inconvenient about it is that it doesn't actually make the compressor into a mid-side compressor. So even when this is on, that's still left, that's still right. That's not mid and side, it's left and right. So really kind of what this thing is it's just a mid-side matrix that's just kind of an add-on. It's just kind of like, it's almost like an afterthought. And I wonder if just mid-side stuff was really popular at the time that he made this one. And like, it's always handy to have a mid-side matrix around, but I would have liked it if there was like in and out patch points on it so I could patch a piece of gear into it mid-side or something to make it a little bit more useful than just having a standalone mid-side matrix just kind of like hanging out there. I think I've used it once. So anyways, it works, but you know, there you have it. Okay, so next we have the stereo level ride control. Now, our output level is in 1 dB steps. I don't know if you noticed that when I was talking about it, but 1 dB step seems kind of crude for a mastering engineer, right? Because we're trying to level match things very precisely. Like even being a half dB off or a quarter dB off can fool your ear into thinking that, you know, something is different happening than is happening. So if you want to get really precise with it, you can actually use the stereo level ride pot. Now it's a very well matched stereo pot. It's got a great feel to it and the perfect amount of resistance. And you can set a very precise loudness matching there. And you also have another 6 dB of attenuation should you want to jack the limiter feedback way up and you wouldn't have enough attenuation on just the output level alone. You can bolster the attenuation with our stereo level ride. Now, why does it say ride on it? Because we normally associate riding with like a fader, right? So we're riding the fader. That's the same idea. So let's say you have a song where the chorus is getting hit pretty hard with the compressor and then it lets go during the verse. That makes the verses, you know, louder than it should be relative to the chorus. So when it goes back into the verse, you might want to move that down. You might want to ride that smoothly down for the verse. Okay, so I like that. I appreciate that. That is something that I do sometimes that I'm mastering. I call it manualmation, where I'm like doing automation moves, but like with my hands, and it makes me feel like I'm a real bespoke mastering engineer. You know what I mean? But anyways, you can do that with this, and I like it. I'll also note that these controls here are continuous pots as opposed to rotary switches like these ones, because you really do want to dial these things in very precisely. We're talking peak reduction, the precise amount of gain reduction that you want to be able to twiddle these things to a finer degree than just a rotary switch. And the limiter response as well, you're kind of dialing that in very precisely as well. These dots and numbers around them are really good for logging and recall with the big knobs. You can really tell where everything is. And I find that setting stuff either on a dot or halfway in between is plenty of resolution. And so I'm basically just like defaulting snapping to kind of those positions, and it's never a problem. Okay, next we have the peak reduction, which is basically just our sidechain linking. It's either dual mono or linked. If you're in stereo, just keep it linked. Don't bother going dual mono, because those opto elements don't actually line up with each other all the time, but when you link it, it forces them to do the same thing, and that's really important to making this thing work properly. But what if you had this thing in the studio and you were recording a folk artist who was singing and playing acoustic guitar? Well, you could put those into dual mono mode and be tracking through this thing to get some delightful optical tube compression on the way in. And I guarantee you that you'd be very happy with that outcome. Okay, and then lastly, and least interestingly, we have this meter select, which is basically gain reduction or VU meter with the +4 standard or the +10 standard, should you want to calibrate the unit, okay? Or just look at your levels in an old school VU style, okay? So that's the compressor. Now we're going to listen to it and hear how it works, because none of that matters if it doesn't sound good. So we got to hear what it sounds like. I got 3 artists for you, or yeah, 3 artists. Today we have Pete Maws with his song Yellow Moon. I've had some requests on my previous videos to put things through like drums and vocals and guitar, and so I had the stems for that, and I decided to put those through the ringer. And you'll be able to hear how the compression affects the effects on it. So there's like reverb and delay on the vocals. Maybe you wouldn't be compressing it at that point, but you can actually hear what it does to the effects there, and that gives you a good indication of the release. So that's not a bad thing. And then I have another song by Groundwaves, which is another Hamilton-based artist. Pete Maws is from Hamilton. And the song is called Dreamsea. I really like Groundwaves. He writes great music, and it's another song that suits this application well. So you're going to hear how that works with that tune. And then lastly, we have a track by Johnson Mills, and it's a great tune. It's another one that's well suited to this compressor, and it kind of reveals how this works. It's kind of a country rock chorus that I'll be showing you on that. Good music up ahead. Enjoy.
Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon yellow like a fever. Got a lot of work to do. Yeah, I gotta lean into it. Even when the moon hangs low, yellow like a fever.
We chase the dream out in the sea. We like 'em green. Please keep it coming in. We battle out. Nothing we'd rather do. Nowhere we'd rather be. We chase the dream.
Okay, so you can hear from those sound examples that it's a really nice sounding compressor, and it fits that description of, you know, liquid gold or like liquid butter all over the mix, right? It's very, very nice. When it's the right thing, it's very, very much the right thing. Now, the way I am as a mastering engineer is I'm the kind of mastering engineer that likes to have a lot of precise control. Like these goalie dynamic EQs back here, like that's my jam. There's so much precise control on it. I love it. But then there's a lot of audio engineers who just like to have a bunch of color units kicking around, and they just kind of pass the audio through it to see what kind of magic happens and if it all works together. And that's a totally legitimate way of doing audio work as well. I would say that the L2M is kind of halfway between those things. You have a bit more control, but really it's just going to do what it does. And there's a few sweet spots you can look for on it, but it kind of just does its thing. So you might like that. You might not like that. It's really fast to get it set up. That's a pro in a lot of situations. It can be used as a dual mono compressor. That's a huge pro as well. The precise control and ability to recall things accurately is a pro as well. By the way, we're doing pros and cons if you couldn't tell. It's got great headroom. I think it has the most headroom out of all the units in the studio, and it's a tube unit, which is great. The noise floor is a little high, but there's actually a mod to lower it like 20 dB, so I could lower that very easily. And I wouldn't say even where the noise floor is at is a con. It's only a con if there's like actually silence in the song, and then you might be able to hear it. But I might have to do a video on that mod just to like lower the noise floor. But anyways, that's not a problem. It's kind of like a neutral. Another pro is that you can use it as just kind of a line amp and get some nice color off the tubes by using that negative feedback control. A con I would say is that there isn't an input gain. I would love an input gain so I could like mess around with like getting different box tones out of the thing, but that's okay. That's not a deal breaker. Another con would be that this mid-side matrix doesn't really feel like it's as useful as it could be. Like, I feel like there's a lot of potential there for that to be a very cool addition to the compressor, and it just isn't quite what it should be, I think. But overall, I would just say that this is, if you like LA2As and you're looking at picking more up, look for one of these. Like, seriously try to find one. Instead of buying 2 LA2As, you may as well get one of these, right? That just like makes perfect sense to me. Similar units to this, I don't know, like, there's a few stereo optical compressors out there. I don't know that they're all doing the same approach though. Like, this one is doing the LA2A approach. There's the Pendulum OCL2, which is a fantastic opto compressor. It's also a tube-based opto compressor, but it is very much more like your VCA type compressors. A ratio knob on it. There's attack and release controls, and it can go pretty fast. You know what I mean? Like, there's a fast mode, which is very fast, and it's a great compressor as well. Not really. It's kind of apples to oranges though with this thing. And then I think about like the Hendiamp's Pollock, and that's also not really the same thing. It's also a tube-based opto compressor, but there's no claims that it's LA2A-ish. It's just another opto compressor. I haven't used that one, but I would very much like to get my hands on that at some point. There's also the TF Pro P38, which is an opto compressor, but it's not tube-based. It's a solid state-based compressor. I had that for a few years and I really liked it. I ended up getting rid of it because I had lower headroom than the rest of my gear, but I don't know. I wonder if I regret that decision now. There's also the Airfield Eliminator stereo version, which is a fantastic one. They make that in Southern Ontario where I used to live, and that is a really wonderful optical compressor as well. I'm going to try to get my hands on one of those in the next year or so to do a review on that as well. So lots of good optical compressors out there, lots of good stereo optical compressors. Not a lot of LA2A based stereo optical compressors though. There is a guy in Hamilton who built a bunch of them, and but he's crazy, man. Like, he kept one of my pieces of gear hostage for like 6 months and wanted me to pay him like triple what the agreed price was, and I had a really hard time with him. So he made some cool compressors, but he's a weird guy. If you live in Hamilton, watch out for that guy. I better cut that out of the video. Anyways, thanks for watching. I always appreciate the comments and getting a discussion going down there. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all those good YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.